than before these conflicts began. 8 long years after President Obama's ill-fated push at regime change, U.S. troops are still on the ground in Syria. More than 500,000 people are dead, hundreds of thousands are terribly injured, and millions more Syrians are displaced. It really is a nightmare of misery. Across the Middle East, we have seen anguish on a colossal scale. We have spent $8 trillion on wars in the Middle East, never really wanting to win those wars. But after all that money was spent and all those lives lost, the young men and women gravely wounded so many, the Middle East.
These were the truest words uttered in my lifetime by a U.S. president. And it came from the face of a man that lies as easily as he does breathing. The catch here is Donald Trump is on his campaign stump, and he is trying to get across to his base that I'm the guy who bringing the troops home and ending these wars. The problem is, as I noted in the other video, those troops are going to Iraq, and Donald Trump is stealing the oil in Syria. Donald Trump is being too honest. Now, what I mean by that is, and I'm saying that sarcastically, because under normal circumstances, a president doesn't get out and say that the last president invaded a country and tried to get engaged in essentially knocking the country over. Usually presidents talking, we're killing people for humanitarian reasons. We're dropping humanitarian bombs. And they're not all that honest in regards to the reason that they're there. Trump, in that moment, was in order to ding his previous opponent. Obama failed miserably at trying to take down Assad and has caused all sorts of misery and has spent, we have in the country, $8 trillion. Let's end this stuff. He's lying, but everything he's saying is true. He's continuing this point. Because, again, under normal circumstances, they don't give you the ball. Meaning what Donald Trump has been saying on the issue of Syria has at times, yes, lying, but in this specific moment, telling the truth and is brazenly getting across U.S. policy to effectively turn our soldiers who put on the uniform with this notion of protecting the country into outright mercenaries to just steal oil. He's stealing the oil. And instead of him using these flowery terms and everything else, he doesn't have the competence to just lie like the other presidents do. Do you honestly think under any circumstances Obama would go in and say we're trying to knock down the government of Assad? He would never say it. Do you think Bush would do it? He would never do it. Do you think any president will honestly come out and say we are in this country to knock that other guy over? That doesn't happen. Obama would say Assad needs to leave. Fair enough. But when he's talking about troops in the Middle East in regards to Syria, despite the fact that we were supporting terrorists in that region, Obama would just say we're there fighting ISIS. Trump's not hiding the ball. He doesn't have the competence to hide the ball. He just tells you we're staying there to steal the oil. Some of our troops will leave. I want to play the clip of this because it's extraordinary to hear a president say this. And yet, he's saying it. Welcome to the soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, find yourself coming back often, like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal, Patreon. Even $1 helps since these videos are demonetized. In my last video, I made the point that despite the fact that Donald Trump gets a clap of the hands for essentially being honest with the American public in regards to the policy in Syria, because think about it for the moment. If the United States troops weren't fighting the Syrian government, meaning Bashar al-Assad, then who was? Who was? And if our troops weren't fighting Bashar al-Assad, how was the United States engaged in a regime change war? Think about it for the moment. Think about it for the moment. The terrorists were fighting Bashar al-Assad. We were supporting various elements of Al-Qaeda to try to take down Assad. That's what Trump is saying in that speech. That is extraordinary to hear. And so I'm so enamored by that. I do want to give him an applause for that. Even though I know he's saying that purely for the standpoint of a campaign, and I even know that he's saying that in the contextual sense, and it's lying. Because the whole point of that is, I'm bringing our troops home. The rub here is, he's also being honest about what the rest of the troops are going to do, because he's keeping some there while they're there. And I find this to be extraordinary, and I don't quite understand how a U.S. president justifies what Trump is about to tell you. I mean, because ultimately we are in somebody else's country, and we are deciding to steal the oil to keep the government of that country from getting access to it. That is an extraordinary thing to say. No president would have said this because it's so brazen and so over the top. Our troops are mercenaries, and those troops are going to stay there, just enough of them, to take the oil from the government of Syria, the rightful government of Syria.
We've secured the oil, and therefore a small number of U.S. troops will remain in the area where they have the oil. And we're going to be protecting it, and we'll be deciding what we're going to do with it in the future. We've secured the oil.
The United States troops in someone else's country has taken the oil. And while we're taking the oil, we will determine what we're going to do with the oil that is from somebody else's country in short order. This. United States to reverse Trump's troop withdrawal and send tanks to Syria. The U.S. is reportedly planning to deploy tanks and other heavy military hardware to protect oil fields in eastern Syria in a reversal of Donald Trump's earlier order to withdraw all troops from the country. This most likely destination for U.S. armored unit is Conoco gas plant near the city of Des Azor. It's interesting that that name of that city doesn't sound like Oklahoma because, it's not in the United States. I'm sorry, I find this to be a betrayal of his base. If he's saying, I'm taking our troops out, and that was his original order, and then he changes that, why did he change that? Now, if you remember, Donald Trump said that the United States should have stolen the oil in Iraq. So I suppose to some degree this is consistent with the things that he said prior. But do you really want our troops in another country entirely to steal the oil from that other country? And is his base okay with that? Now, I suspect his base probably would be. What about the independents? Are you okay with the U.S. troops essentially being used as a mercenary force to steal the wealth of another country and make the determination, the U.S., on what to do with that wealth, and mainly to keep it out of the hands of the government itself? I find that to be an extraordinary position to take. Yeah, I find that to be an extraordinary position to take. Trump is being too honest. And again, I'm saying that extremely sarcastically. No president would have ever said that the last president was trying to knock over the government of the country. And no president would have ever said that we're keeping our troops there to essentially steal the oil. Justify that. Justify that. There's some Trump supporters that watch this channel. Justify that particular position. Why is it okay for the United States to steal the oil from somebody else's country? Like, share,